Just back on the announcement today, given that example you used of how difficult it is to oust a director, is there any case, we talked about this in the recent AGM season, where there were a lot of strong votes against the remuneration reports. Is there any cases you can see where where the legislation that the government's trumpeting would have had any marked difference?
Well, there's been a couple of cases where there has been two strikes. Off the top of my head, I can't. None come to. I think Transurban's had a couple. There's a couple of smaller companies that have had a couple.
But you're saying it wouldn't translate into getting rid of the board, though?
It certainly wouldn't. And shareholders would be very loath to vote out a board. It's a pretty significant step. I think partially the reason why shareholders are willing to vote against remuneration reports is because they're not binding, and they know it's going to be a slap on the wrist. It has worked well. At Telstra, for example, in 08 or 07, there was that very substantial vote against the remuneration report, and the board really did take it on board, so to speak, and really did fix it the following year. Macquarie Bank has been another one that has certainly improved how they remunerate executives. It's not perfect, but they really have gone a long way to provide a substantial alignment with shareholders.
And then you have Mirvac that actually says we don't need shareholders' meetings, and that would maybe solve the problem. They can just write in on the internet, might be better. Probably not. Look, the other one today was the announcement on the clawback provisions.
It's an interesting one. The clawback one seems like a pretty good idea. The problem with the clawback is a similar sort of thing. When Chris Bowen, who's now Immigration Minister, but was then the corporate governance minister, and was a very good minister, when Bowen announced the clawback plans in April this year, he said something along the lines of, "Oh, we can't think of when this would be used in the recent past, but it's a good thing." And the problem with that is, it should have been used. You can think of some examples. Michael King at MFS was paid about a $2.8 million bonus only months before MFS went under. Phil Green was paid about $38 million in cash and cash bonuses before Babcock went under. There's a bunch of examples. David Coe at Allco, Gordon Fell at Allco. Executives being paid extraordinary amounts, Andrew Scott at Centra, extraordinary amounts of remuneration, of bonuses, of cash bonuses that of course aren't refundable. And the company went down. And yet Chris Bowen, who announcing this plan 6 months ago, couldn't think of any examples where the clawback could be used. So you've got to wonder if Bowen just ignores those instances, when would this ever be used? OK, well, just overall, in summing up, because I'm then going to move on to highlights, lowlights of the year and predictions very quickly, but in summary, what we've seen today in all these things, they would seem to be populist things aimed at shareholders, not winning over the business community, even if they're sort of a bit toothless. Well, they're certainly populist, and whenever the big remuneration season comes along, the government has to look like they're doing something. But of course, they don't really want to do anything because it's just too much hassle and too much trouble, and businesses are big donors to political parties. So at the end of the day, that they'll give lip service to it, they'll mention it, they'll announce a productivity commission review, but nothing will happen. And remuneration certainly won't be curbed with these kind of suggestions. OK, well, on that point, I'll go to the year just past. What was the highlight for you from a business, from the financial stories out there? I think one of the highlights in terms of great business stories was mentioned on your show last week. I think the Groupon story, and I've got a personal interest in it because I've got a similar sort of business in Australia, but Groupon is a business that didn't exist 2 years ago. And the US has been through a recession in the last couple of years, as you very well know. And despite that, Groupon has been the fastest ever growing company in world history. It's the fastest company to $1 billion in sales. It rejected a $6 billion buyout from Google, and I think rightfully so. It's gone from nothing to probably about a $7 or $8 billion valuation in less than 2 years, while many other media companies, our own Fairfax, for example, are struggling. So what a great business story that's been, run by a 29-year-old guy almost fresh out of college in the US. And we should declare that you're in the business. You're on the bandwagon, aren't you? I am. I own what's known as a Groupon clone called Zoopon, ironically, Janine. It's quite a crowded market in Australia, so we're one of the players. But it's certainly an interesting industry, and it's rare that advertising is content, and it's really turned media on its face. And Groupon has been far more financially successful than even Facebook or Google was at that time in their existence. OK, well, apart from predicting you'll all make more money next year, in a general sense, what are your forecasts for next year? Is it going to be, are you bullish or bearish? I'm very bearish, Janine. In Australia alone, the housing bubble is just extraordinary. You've seen the US fall off a cliff, we've seen Ireland fall off a cliff, we've seen a lot of Europe in all sorts of trouble, yet our housing market went up about 20% this year. At the same time, rental yields were steady or falling. So we've got an asset that's giving about a 2% yield, and it's making up about half of the bank's balance sheets. So all this talk of banks getting us through the GFC, they haven't gotten us through anything. They're incredibly highly leveraged, they're incredibly risky. They could very well take a massive hit next year if something happens to residential housing, which in the last quarter of this year, clearance rates have absolutely slumped. In Melbourne and Sydney, they're below 50% now. So we're looking at a real worry that housing could drag the real economy down, as it did in the US, as it did in Ireland.
Well, on that happy note, I'll wish you the compliments of the season and look forward to talking to you next year. And let's hope you're wrong, though I